Before getting into marching percussion playing techniques, I would like to discuss one other topic: listening. As you've already heard me say a number of times in this course, listening is the most important skill you can develop as a musician, and teaching your students to listen better is the quickest way that the quality of your ensembles will improve. Not only will each performer be more aware of the sounds they are creating, they will be more aware of the performers around them and how their part fits into the whole. I'm going to detail a system focused on building the listening skills of your marching percussionists. This does not mean that these techniques can't be used in other sections of the marching band or even in other musical ensembles. I encourage you to utilize the transfer of learning and apply what I say here to other musical situations that you find yourself in. Now for the details. This system of developing listening skills is based on a hierarchy of listening levels. Let's use a tenor player in the drumline as our example here. The first level of a tenor player's listening hierarchy is for them to listen to themselves. As a performer carefully listens to their own sound, they can make real-time adjustments to personal performance matters such as evenness, dynamic, sound quality, and rhythmic integrity. If each performer in the ensemble can first work to achieve these basic characteristics of quality musicianship, putting all the pieces together can begin. The second level of listening for a tenor player is to listen into the rest of the tenor section. At this level, performers can make adjustments to timing, balance, and interpretation. For a wind player at this level, pitch can start to be addressed. Listening at this second level assures that sections of the large ensemble are playing accurately together. Addressing issues at this level is a great topic for regular sectional rehearsals. The third level for a tenor player is to listen into the rest of the drumline, specifically into the center snare drummer. Traditionally, the center snare drummer is the most experienced and qualified percussionist. The volume and clarity that the snare drum provides makes it a great instrument to control tempo, even across the width of a football field. Selecting a student to be the center snare drummer of your ensemble is an important decision, and care should be taken when choosing a student to fill this leadership role. At this third level of listening into the rest of the drumline, adjustment of balance between sections, consistency of tempo, and overall musical shape can occur. As you may now see, these higher order concepts are very difficult to address before lower order issues are resolved. If a performer can't create a quality sound or accurately perform their own rhythms, there's no hope in adjusting the balance or making minor tempo adjustments to the whole drumline. For a tenor player in the drumline, this is really where the listening can end. As long as they are constantly making adjustments at these three levels, they're doing their job. For a member of the front ensemble, the listening levels are very similar. A vibraphone player should start by listening to their own personal sound, then to the rest of the vibraphones in the front ensemble, and then to the whole front ensemble. Traditionally, the center marimba player or the xylophonist serves as the anchor for tempo and timing in the front ensemble. One additional step is needed here though. This vibraphonist must listen back to the drumline and the center snare drummer to be sure that their sound is aligned with the pulse of the ensemble. This last step is commonly skipped by many members of the ensemble and is the primary culprit for tears during a performance. All members of the marching band should be aligning their sound with the sound of the drumline, with few exceptions. These exceptions may be performers who are located behind the drumline or performers who are very far away from the drumline to the left or right. These are situations that you would want to avoid at all costs during the show planning stages. It will take hours of rehearsal time to teach your ensemble to accurately perform in these tough listening environments. It's definitely okay to have the drumline move forward in front of the band, but be sure that the performers located far behind the drumline are not listening forward and reacting to the sounds they are hearing. This will again cause a delay in their sound reaching the audience. Let's now get into the technique of playing a marching percussion instrument. I will start by talking about general performance techniques, specifically as they apply to the marching snare drum. In the following video, I will talk more about the techniques specific to the marching tenors and bass drum. The first thing to keep in mind is that the marching snare drum technique should not be much different from the concert snare drum technique. The stick is held similarly, the stroke still comes primarily from the wrist, double strokes and rolls are performed the same, and a fluid motion of the sticks is desired. But because the two drums do differ in construction and in the context in which they are played, minor alterations to the technique should be made in order to account for these differences. The obvious difference in construction is the depth of the drums. A marching snare drum is usually about 12 inches deep, whereas a concert snare drum is typically between 5 and 6.5 inches deep. The heads and snares used on each instrument are different as well. Marching snare heads are much thicker and tuned tighter than concert snare heads. Also, marching snare wires are thicker and more rigid than the typical curly snare wire used on many concert snare drums. Because of these differences in construction, a thicker drumstick is typically used on the marching snare drum than on a concert snare drum. These two instruments also differ in the context in which they are played. Concert snare drums are generally played indoors on a concert stage with a seated band or orchestra. In general, only one performer is playing the snare drum part to a piece, and the audience is relatively close to the ensemble. Marching snare drums are generally played outdoors on a football field with sometimes upwards of 200 other musicians. Almost always, multiple performers are playing the snare drum part simultaneously, and the audience is hundreds of feet away. All of these minor differences in construction and context contribute to the need to slightly alter the concert snare technique for success on the marching snare drum. With all of this in mind, I have two quick alterations you should make to your grip and stroke. First, close the spaces between your fingers and thumb in the grip. Remember back to the snare drum grip we learned at the beginning of this course. I instructed you to keep the window open between your index finger and thumb and just let the back fingers fall on the stick where it felt comfortable. This allowed us to focus on a loose grip and allowing the stick to rebound up off of the drum head. With the thicker marching stick and tighter drum heads, closing the gaps in the grip can offer more support. The primary mistake that you must guide your students to avoid is squeezing the stick too tightly. I'll remind you what I said about the concert snare drum grip that's even more pertinent here. Contact without pressure. Touch the stick, but don't squeeze it. The second alteration I will recommend is to start and end with the stick in the down position, hovering just above the batter head. Some teachers call this technique controlled rebound because the sticks are stopped before they rebound high off of the drum. Part of the marching band aesthetic is having all of the performers look uniform in their approach and movement. Starting and ending with the stick down gives them a home base that is simple to define across a whole drum line. This also encourages the stroke to move downward into the deep shell of the marching drum, giving a full tone. Let me demonstrate a few exercises with these two alterations. First is exercise 26.1, 8 on a hand. This exercise is identical to exercise 2.3 that we played way back at the beginning of the course. What I want you to focus on here is the technique. Notice how I have closed up the spaces in my grip and how I start and end with the stick down. Next, let's look at exercise 26.2, accent tap. Here we must add upstrokes and downstrokes to the marching snare technique. Also notice that I'm striking the drum directly in the center of the head. This is slightly different than the concert snare drum approach as well. Lastly, I'd like to play exercise 26.4, 16th timing. This exercise is similar to the 16th timing exercises I covered back in lesson 3. Here, notice how the stick remains in the down position when it's not being used. Let me play the first 4 measures once slowly so you can see what I mean. Now, let's try it all the way through and faster. The next question that arises is, when should I start teaching this to my students? I recommend starting marching snare drum technique sometime in 7th or 8th grade. Here in Texas, most schools begin teaching instrumental music in 6th grade. This gives the students a full year to gain facility rebounding the stick and staying loose, as well as developing all of the other necessary skills for success in band or orchestra classes. Depending on your specific situation, you may need to start marching technique in 7th grade, or you may be able to wait until 8th grade. If your 7th and 8th grade percussionists are split by grade level, you can continue working on fundamental skills with the younger students while starting those who are preparing for the jump to high school marching band on the marching snare technique. If all of your 7th and 8th grade percussionists are in the same class, it may just be easier to work with them all together on the same concepts. A third option would be to wait until high school to start working on these techniques. Maybe you'll have success working with students who are just interested in playing in the battery over the summer before their 9th grade year. Ultimately, it's up to you and your specific situation. Just be sure to allow your students to develop a basic understanding of grip and stroke before you start changing things for them. Before I close, I want to spend a minute or two talking about drumline exercises. Exercises are the best way to focus on micro-level concepts that contribute to successful performance of advanced music. My primary goal with each exercise that I write and teach is to focus on one specific topic. For example, the accent tap exercise that I played a minute ago focuses primarily on the accent to tap clarity, one hand at a time. On the other hand, exercise 26.3, accent grid, focuses on accents within a passage using alternating sticking. Combining both of these concepts is possible, but I find that focusing on one at a time is a more effective and efficient way to build these small concepts. With each exercise, I also try to keep it short and simple. I don't want my students struggling to memorize an exercise or spending hours trying to understand what the purpose of it is. You also want to be able to make comments and adjustments quickly and often. If an exercise is too long, you won't get a chance to constantly address issues that come up. The exercises accompanying this lesson can be performed on any of the marching percussion instruments. Just pick a drum on the tenors or choose a single bass drum and play along. Following the next lesson, I've also included these same exercises in score format with tenor parts and 5-part bass drum parts included. Start by playing just the snare drum part and then work to understand the other parts as well. In a classroom setting, all the parts to these exercises can be played simultaneously with a whole drumline. Lastly, keep in mind that the exercises I have written here are not the only correct exercises to play. This is just a sample of ways that you can hit specific concepts through exercises. Use your creativity as a teacher to effectively serve the needs of your students. Now, go practice some marching snare drum. Have fun and good luck.